I decided to make this video because of someone who put in a forum post that there was a mission in FSX which required a very steep bank, one they described as impossible to make based on the instructions in this mission. I'm not familiar with the mission and I don't intend to fly it, but I thought it was an interesting approach, and so we figured we'd give it a shot and make a video of it. This is, as you see, a teardrop approach. The turn point for the teardrop is at 16 DME from the Quito-Rwy35 VOR, also known as the Quito VOR. So at this point, 16 DME out, we calculate a turn radius of about 2.9 nautical miles, and you can see our other video on the teardrop procedure turn to understand how that's done. Basically make the turn going from the 152 radial inbound on the 354 radial at 16 DME, which gives a turn radius of 2.9 nautical miles. The next factor we have to take into account is what our turning radius would be. We can't use the rule of thumb because that rule of thumb is only good up to 200 knots, and our true airspeed is going to be about 265 knots. And we're estimating this based on our indicated airspeed of 210 plus 2% for every 1,000 feet of altitude, and we're going to be making the turn, at least at the start, at 13,000 feet. So looking at the chart, going up for a true airspeed of 265 knots, a 30-degree bank, a turn bank angle, gives us a turn radius of about 11,000 feet. And that works out to be just over 1.8 nautical miles, 11,000 divided by 6,076. So with a turn radius of 1.8 miles and a turn radius for the teardrop of 2.9 miles, take the ratio of those two times 30 degrees and we end up with a bank angle required to make this turn of just under 20 degrees, about 18.5 degrees. So hardly a steep turn at all, and again, I'm not familiar with the mission, so maybe I've got all this wrong, but from the real world standpoint, or at least the real world when this airport still existed, the new one took over about 3 years ago, this is the correct way to fly this approach. So we're making our departure here in the Lear-45. I know the mission is for a 747, but air doesn't know that. The fluid mechanics are the same regardless of the aircraft you're flying. It's all dependent on speed and density altitude. So we lift off. Again, standard departure procedure here for the Learjet. Nose up to gain altitude. Bring the nose down a bit to gain speed. Once we begin to get our speed up, we bring the flaps up to 0 and lower the nose a little bit further to about 7.5 degrees. We'll hold this attitude until our airspeed is around 240 knots, and then we'll let the nose drift back up again to maintain our airspeed below 250 knots. At the same time, we're going to reduce our power to somewhere between 70 and 72% N1. This is the standard noise abatement procedure for the Learjet. And you can see here we're just above 240 knots indicated and about 10 degree pitch. We're going to hold the runway heading and then make a turn to the right in order to intercept our outbound course. This will put us pretty much on our heading. So we've begun our turn here, and you can see we're nearly to our outbound course heading. Look around, make sure we're not going to run into anybody. About a 10 degree angle of attack, nose up, and we can increase our power a little bit now that we're above 5,000 feet, continuing to keep our speed below 250 knots. And you can see that we're going to end up pretty close to being directly to the VOR. I think we're going to be a couple of degrees shy, so we'll roll out just a couple of degrees early. And at our bank angle that we've got now, about 24-25 degrees, the rule of thumb here is to start your turn rollout about half your bank angle. So we'll start at 11 or 12 degrees before we get to our desired point, which is going to be just a little to the left of where that cursor is pointing, just a couple of degrees. So we'll roll out and get ourselves squared away on our inbound heading. We'll fly directly to the VOR. If you're not familiar with that, get the heading bug out of the way so you can see this. Rolling out on the turn. If you're not familiar with flying by VOR, you can see our videos on that for further information. So you'll see we're a couple of degrees off. We'll nudge the omni-bearing indicator over and proceed directly to the Quito VOR. And you'll notice in the lower left-hand corner of the primary flight display we have a headwind quartering off the nose at 20 knots, and we can see that on the moving map our actual bearing line is a couple of degrees to the right of our heading, pushing us over a little bit, but not bad. So here we are. We departed, flew almost a complete circle, as you can see, to intercept our route, and we're going to fly directly to the Quito VOR. And at that point we'll then make our turn and start our teardrop procedure. So at this point we're near top of descent. We'll overfly the VOR at 17,000 feet, go to 16 DME off the Quito VOR, and then make our teardrop procedure turn, which we've calculated will require a bank angle of just under 20 degrees. During that turn we'll drop down to 12,000 feet, hold that altitude until we get to the glide slope, and we should intercept the glide slope somewhere about 8.5 DME based on the ILS DME measurement. And we'll start our descent at about 32 miles from the VOR, 3,000 feet per minute. We'll need to slow a little bit, so 30 to 32 miles will give us several miles to slow down. We only need to slow down to 210 indicated, however. We'll try and maintain that speed because apparently that is the speed specified in the mission in FSX. So here we are, we're on our descent inside 20 miles from the Quito VOR, descending at 3,000 feet per minute. We're just through 22,000 right now for 17,000. Or more correctly, in the United States, that would be flight level 220 for 17,000 feet. Take a look around. Just enjoy the view a little bit here. Nice river down there. I wonder what that is. I have to look that up. And we'll continue on down until we reach our target altitude, our initial altitude of 17,000 feet. So here we are. We're nearly at 17,000 feet, just shy of 10 miles from the VOR, so pretty much right as planned. And we'll be making a very small turn at the VOR from our current heading of approximately 132 degrees to our outbound heading as per the approach plate of 152 degrees. And we'll slow her down to about 210 knots as best as we can. Take one more quick look at the plate. Crossing at 132 degrees, and we'll make the turn and fly out at 152 degrees. Not much of a turn here. Our altitude at the Quito VOR, as specified in the profile view, is 17,000 feet. Cross the VOR, head outbound on the 152 radial and drop our altitude to 13,200. Start our turn at 16 DME and drop our altitude to 12,000. Hold 12,000 and intercept the glide slope and fly in from there. And we're about 6 nautical miles from the VOR. Keep in mind, though, that, and we'll try and pick our speed up a little bit, keep in mind that the closest DME distance you're going to get from the VOR is about 1 mile, 1 nautical mile. And this is because DME is measured from the station itself. not lateral distance. So we're going to overfly the VOR station at a distance above it of about 1 nautical mile. You look at the approach plate, you can see the terrain where the VOR station is about 11,000 feet, and we're crossing at 17,000. 6,000 feet to 1 nautical mile is 6,076 feet. So again, coming across the VOR, turn to the 152 radio, 16 DME out, start our teardrop turn, bank angle of 20 degrees. So we're nearly at the VOR, and we should expect the VOR to signal to go dead at about 1 nautical mile. And we'll turn things to the 152 heading and then make our turn. And you can see here that as we crossed 9/10 of a nautical mile, it went dead, so we were pretty close. And now it's live again, and we'll continue our right turn. And that needle looks like it's fairly far deflected, but we're very close to the station. Keep in mind that when you're very close to either a VOR or NDB station, a very small angle is required to intercept your desired radial if you're fairly close to it. And you can see that even at this about 10-degree angle, we've started to intercept our desired radial, the 152 radial, that will fly outbound to 16 DME. We'll pull up the approach plate again. We're on this track now, about 3 DME from the VOR, so we have another 13 miles to go. And we'll try to get our speed in line here with what the mission specified. I won't go into any detail here about what I would fly this at, but it certainly wouldn't be this fast. And do keep in mind, it doesn't matter what aircraft you're flying, the fluid dynamics work the same for every aircraft. And so if you're flying the Learjet, or if you're flying the regional jet, or a Boeing 737 or a 747, it doesn't matter. All this would be done exactly the same way. You just have more people with you, I guess, if you had one of those larger aircraft. So we're looking for our 16 DME point, trying to get our speed to 210, and we are making our descent from 17,000 down to the prescribed 13,200 feet, and from there we'll start the turn and then drop further to 12,000 feet. Nice rate of descent here, 1,400 feet per minute, not very fast at all, and we're getting our speed back to the 210 knots. Unfortunately, I will tell you that I probably won't be able to hold that speed through the turn, but we'll at least start there, if not a little higher than that, to try and average it out. This is the first time I've flown this approach, so I guess we're all going to see what happens together here. So, all right, so holding the 152 radial, almost 10 DME out, and we'll be making the turn and switching frequencies to the ILS once we're in the turn. You will note that the frequency I use is different than that shown on the approach plate. I have a relatively recent update of nav8 frequencies on this version of FSX, but I know that older versions do have the same frequency as shown on the plate, 110.5. Mine is 109.3. So we're getting very close now to the 16 DME mark, where speed's just a little faster than we want. So we'll try and slow that down again to the 210. We are actually exceeding the max speed, but we won't tell anybody, hopefully. 16 DME, we start our turn. We'll just be just shy of a 20-degree bank angle here. And now we're getting our speed back down to where it belongs. We just kind of temporarily went up due to our descent. And we're passing through 13,200, and we're going to go to 12,000 now. We change our frequency to the ILS frequency and put our Omni bearing indicator on the actual runway magnetic heading. Here they show 354 degrees. In my version, and looking at Plan G, I have 352 degrees, and that's what I have tuned to. Trying to keep this at 210. We're dropping off a little bit of speed here, just under 210 knots. Hold the bank angle at about 19 to 20 degrees as we calculated. We got a little bit of crosswind from the right that's pushing us out slightly, so we might just nudge the bank angle up to 20 or so. And we'll just watch as we intercept the localizer. We're 13.5 DME out by the localizer now. We're not on the VOR's DME. We're now using the localizer's DME. We'll intercept the glide slope at about 8.7 DME from the localizer. Nice slow descent rate down to 12,000. We don't need much. We have plenty of time. And this will help us manage our speed. And at this point, I am slowing down intentionally below the 210 knots. You have to get this thing on the ground sometime, and we have to slow down before we get there. So again, we'll keep an eye on the localizer, hold the bank angle at about 19 degrees, just slightly below the 20-degree point, still keeping our speed up relatively fast. And we should be intercepting the localizer here in just a few moments. Move in a little bit. You can see the needle start to move, and we're going to turn just a little tighter, about 21-22 degrees, to make sure we intercept that. Got a wind off to our left that's going to tend to blow us to the right, so we'll have to compensate a little bit for that. And that same wind, as you slow down, will cause more of an effect. And we'll roll out of our turn. We'll get back to where we belong. We're just a fraction of a degree off the localizer, so we're lined up pretty well. And we'll keep ourselves on the localizer and hold the altitude of 12,000 feet until we intercept the glide slope, which we're expecting to happen in about 8.7 DME according to the approach plate. And you can see the glide slope needle already coming down. We're about 9 DME out at this point. Once we intercept the glide slope, we'll set up for our final landing configuration. We are at 20 degrees of flaps right now and slowing. And when we get to the glide slope, we'll lower the gear and we'll go full flaps. Got a little gear warning there because the flaps beat the gear down. And at this speed, our descent rate would be about 900 feet per minute. Will keep us on the glide slope. Autopilot is off. We're just hand flying this, and it's kind of part of the challenge and the fun, so that's what we'll do. And we got that crosswind, 12 knots, blowing us off to the right. Kind of wants to make us move over a little bit. The technique you use here is, the first thing you want to do is to nudge the plane over to stop the needle from moving. Once you've stopped the needle from moving, then you just nudge it a little bit more to bring the needle back in line. Otherwise, if you don't do that sort of two-step process, you will find yourself overshooting. And just like being close to any other nav aid, the closer you get, the more sensitive this becomes, so it takes smaller and smaller corrections. So we've got that needle stopped. Now we'll just nudge it just a little bit over to try and get it in perfect alignment. We're on the glide slope, doing pretty well. 800 feet per minute at this speed is about right. It's really about 850. It'll keep you on a 3-degree glide slope, just slightly above it, which is a fine place to be. Better too high than too low. And we're gradually lining up that localizer needle. So here we are. We're short final, basically within 3 miles, just a hair high at this point. And as you can see, as you look out, the visibility really is quite good. And so at this point we can make visual contact with the runway and proceed in and land. Keep on the localizer, and on the glide slope you'll see the displaced runway here. And we'll aim for a touchdown zone that's marked just beyond the displacement point. And this is fairly typical. We're just a hair above the glide slope, but you will sometimes see that the VASI does not completely agree with the electronic glide slopes. Here we're on the glide slope and we just got 2 reds, so this one agrees fairly well. Sometimes you will notice that there's only 1 red and 3 whites. So down to a landing at the touchdown zone is our spot, and pretty close. We'll let it roll out. Thrust reversers on. Once the nose wheel's down, small aircraft like this, you might want to push forward on the yoke a bit. And make sure you turn your thrust reversers off. Any aircraft Once you get down around 60 knots, you don't want to go below 60 knots. Otherwise you may suck something nasty into your engines, and you don't want that to happen. We'll roll out a bit and hard on the brakes. The carbon fiber brakes like to be hit hard and long, not tapped like steel drum brakes. So we bite down on the brakes, and then when we get down to the speed we want, we'll make a nice gentle turn off onto the taxiway. So we'll take a look at what we just did. We overflew the VOR, and from the northwest, very small turn here, and you can see that we flew directly over the VOR. In this case we could have turned just slightly before it, but this is such a small turn you don't really need to. Make a small correction off to the right to intercept the 152 radio, fly outbound 16 DME, make your procedure turn, and intercept the localizer. Small adjustments as you get to the localizer, and fly it on in. You can see here on Plan G we're zoomed in quite a bit, and that tiny little bit to the right of the localizer, we were about halfway down. That fraction of a degree you can actually see. And just to show you here the frequency for this VOR for my aircraft was 109.3, with the actual runway magnetic heading of 352 degrees. And Plan G makes a pretty handy way to check this. So thanks for watching. If you enjoy flying like this or would like to learn, there's a contact email address in the description. Otherwise, again, thanks for watching.